Alright, let's review segment rules in a circle. The first rule is if you have two chords. Here we have chord CB and chord AD. Remember, when we have two chords in a circle, the rule is the product of the segments of one chord will be equal to the product of the segments of the other chord. Remember, product means to multiply. So you're going to take the two segments from one chord. This chord CB has two pieces, piece from C to E. You're going to take that and multiply it times the second piece, which is the piece from E to B. The product of those two segments will be equal to the product of the segments on the second chord. The second chord is this chord AD, and it again has two pieces. There's the piece from A to E. I'm going to take and multiply that times the piece from E to D. Okay, so the rule one more time. The product of the segments of one chord will be equal to the product of the segments of the second chord. Alright, let's look at the second circle. In the second circle we have two secant segments. We have a secant segment from A to C and another secant segment from A to D. From A to E. Okay. With secant segments, remember there is an external portion and then the whole segment. The external portion is the portion from the common exterior point to the circle. So this segment AD is the external portion on this side. Remember, with two secant segments, you want to take the product of the external segment and the entire segment. So the external portion AB multiplied with the entire secant segment from A to C. Okay, so we have the external segment times the entire segment. I'm going to do the same thing on the second secant. I'm going to take the external portion AD and multiply it times the whole segment from A to E. Okay, so in words you have the external segment times the whole segment will be equal to the external segment times the whole segment. Okay, and then our last one. Our last rule is for a secant segment and a tangent segment. On the secant side of this, we would do the same thing. We want the external piece, AC, times the whole segment, AD. And that would be equal to, now we want to look at the tangent segment. On the tangent segment, notice there's not two pieces. There's just this one piece, just an external segment. And so what you want to do is multiply that external segment times itself, or AB times AB, or we could just say AB squared. Okay, so let's look at that one more time. On the secant side, remember it's the external segment times the whole segment. So external segment AC times the whole segment AD. On the tangent side, we just take the tangent and square it. So AB squared. Let's look at some examples, put some numbers in these formulas. In this first example, we have two chords. Remember, the chords have two pieces. They intersect each other and cut each other into two pieces. So this first segment from N to Q has been cut into two pieces. One piece is 4 and the other piece is X. Remember, the rule is the product of these segments, 4 times X, will be equal to the product of the segments of the other chord. The other chord goes from M to P and has two pieces, 3 and 8. You've got to multiply those two pieces, 3 times 8. So we have the product of the segments of one chord is equal to the product of the segments of the second chord. Multiply 4 times x will be equal to 3 times 8, or 24. Divide both sides by 4, and we find that x is equal to 6. Okay, so one more time. The product of the segments of one chord will be equal to the product of the segments of the second chord. Let's look at our next example. In this next example, we have two secant segments. Remember, with secant segments, there's the external portion of the segment, and then there is the whole segment. The rule is take the external piece, 10, and multiply it times the whole segment. To get the length of the whole segment, you have to add the external piece plus the internal piece, so 10 plus x, so that you have the external segment times the whole segment. Will be equal to, do the same thing on the second chord. Okay, again, you have an external portion, which is 7, and you want to multiply that times the whole segment, so you want to add the 7 plus the 12 to get the whole segment. 7 plus 12, or 19. Okay. Simplify. Use the distributive property. 10 times 10 would be 100. 10 times x would be 10x. On the right hand side, 7 times 19 would be 133. Solve your equation. Subtract 100 from both sides, so you have 10x equals 33. Divide both sides by 10. X would be equal to 3.3. Okay, so one more time. With two secant segments, remember it's the external portion of the segment times the length of the whole segment will be equal to the external portion of the segment times the length of the entire segment. Alright, one last example. In this last example, we have a secant segment and a tangent segment. The secant segment goes from the external point A all the way across the circle to D, and your tangent segment goes from the external point A all the way to the point of tangent CB. Remember, the rule on the secant side is the same as what we've been doing. We want the external portion, which is 9, times the length of the entire segment. The entire segment, we need the external piece, 9, plus the internal piece, x. So we want 9 plus x. That will be equal to, on our tangent segment, we don't have an internal piece and external piece. We just have the external piece. And we want to take and multiply it times itself, or square the tangent side. Okay, so one more time. The secant side, you have the external piece times the length of the whole segment will be equal to the tangent side squared. Use the distributive property. 9 times 9 is 81, plus 9 times x will be equal to 15 squared, or 225. Subtract 81 from both sides. 9x will be equal to 144. Divide by 9. X would be equal to 16. Alright, let's look at all three of those rules one more time. For two chords, think about it. For two chords, you want to take the product of the segments of one chord, or CE times EB, will be equal to the product of the segments of the second chord, or AE times ED. For the two secant segments, remember you have an external portion and then the whole segment. So you want to take the external piece, AB, times the whole distance from A to C, and that will be equal to the external portion on the other secant times the whole secant segment from A to E. Okay, so it's the external piece times the whole segment will be equal to the external piece times the whole segment. Alright, last one. secant segment and a tangent segment. On the secant segment, you'll do the same thing. The external piece, AC, times the entire segment, all the way from A to D. That product will be equal to the tangent side squared, or AB squared. That's it for segment rules in a circle. Only 3. 2 chords, the product of the segments of one chord equals the product of the segments of the other chord. 2 secants, external portion of the secant times the whole secant segment will be equal to the product of the external segment times the whole segment. A secant and a chord, take the external portion times the whole segment will be equal to the tangent side squared.